Welcome to the Interfaith Communities, United for Justice and Peace. Today is Friday, the 13th of the month, 2026. And we now move to Steve Rohde, my friend, and the person who helps coordinate and coordinating means you take the criticism. And thank you for your leadership. Have a reflection from Steve.
Thank you, Greg. I was so moved by a recent essay that I decided to make it my reflection today. It's by Hamza Awadi. It has the provocative title, A Palestinian's Plea for Zionism. I was born in Dura in the hills of Hebron, southwest of Jerusalem, into a family that carries love for the land and the memory of loss with quiet dignity. My grandfather was a Palestinian fadeh, a martyr or sacrifice, who was killed by the Israeli security forces in 1978. I was taught the details of his death, but they did not teach me to seek revenge. They taught me that courage must serve life. Since I was 17 years old, I have labored to create spaces in which enemies could encounter one another as human beings. This has not been easy. Over the last 2 years, even in this fresh hell, notwithstanding the unprecedented bitterness between the two communities, I have worked to help young Palestinians and Israelis speak to one another as human beings. I studied at Birzeit University and at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and I try to let dignity lead toward repair. People often ask me, if I am so critical of Zionism, why do I still believe that peace is the only way forward between Jews and Palestinians? My answer, my creed, is simple and stubborn. Because through the years I have met so many Jews, those who have caused harm, those who have healed, and everyone in between. Beneath every belief, every behavior, and every political attitude or orientation, I have always seen the same thing: a precious, vulnerable human being who longs to feel safe and free to be themselves. Even those capable of evil are also capable of love. This is true of Palestinians too, just as it is true of all human beings. My son looks an awful lot like the children who spoke Hebrew near where I was born, on both sides of the Green Line. When I look at a child, any child, I do not see ideologies. I see a longing for life, a longing to laugh without fear, to run without looking over his shoulder, to grow into a man or a woman unhindered by walls, checkpoints, accusations, or revenge. I see the same pure longing in Palestinian children and in Jewish children alike. Children should not be fed on revenge. It is a poison. I believe that if we choose to nurture our children's childhood rather than erase it, we can build a future where our safety is no longer brought at an expense of others' people's dignity. Ramallah, October 5, 2023. I was driving my son in the car, turned a corner and met rifles. Soldiers in the headlights, voices sharp, the air suddenly thin. We both recognized the IDF uniforms. His small fingers tightened on the seat. I spoke in Hebrew and English with my hands open on the wheel, each word chosen to lower the temperature of the moment. One soldier eased his weapon and said it was a surprise, a lucky break. We were not killed, as if alive was a reprieve for which we should be grateful. We were the exception. The instant we were clear, my son, 6.5 years old, reached for his phone and played Bob Marley, singing Three Little Birds. Music filled the car. Don't worry about a thing, every little thing gonna be all right. We did not speak. In that quiet, I understood something that years of dialogue had only suggested. Dialogue can open hearts, but it cannot build a safe reality, not by itself, Dialogue is too easily thwarted by power. 2 days later, as the world woke to October 7, I fled the West Bank with my son. We will go back one day when it is safe. Criticizing political movements, including destructive policies carried out in the name of Zionism, is not remotely the same as harboring hatred toward Jewish people. I have loved and learned from Jews who challenged the very injustices I raised my voice against, and some of them raised their voices with mine. I have also been hurt by actions taken in the name of other causes. Zionism is hardly the only political movement that has been scarred by cruelty. All of these experiences have taught me an essential wisdom. Politics is often vicious and inhuman, but people are far more complex than the causes they champion. No nation or people should be reduced to the worst acts done in its name, and no good deed should be blotted out because of a crime committed by the person responsible for the goodness or by the group of which he is a member. My faith in the possibility of peace is not naive. It is deliberate, it is open-eyed, and it is stubborn. It has to be. I have cultivated it with intelligent intention. It is built on countless encounters, conversations that begin with suspicion but end in recognition, in acts of kindness that broke through long calcified mistrust, moments that I sat beside strangers in discomfort and refused to let that discomfort harden into hatred. These experiences, some of which I happened upon by chance, but many of which I sought out, proved to me that human beings can be shockingly altered by direct encounters with people we had mistaken for caricatures of themselves. I must not erase you, and you must not erase me. I must accept the legitimacy of your self-definition, and you must accept the legitimacy of my self-definition. I must learn to speak without contempt about Israel, and you must learn to speak without contempt about Palestine. I do not demand of others that they accept my politics. I demand only that they accept something simpler and more fundamental, that any system that denies one group's safety or dignity denies everyone's humanity. You cannot dehumanize others without disfiguring yourself. A permanent security must be built upon a foundation of justice and shared rights, not of humiliation and domination. Any other plan will be brittle and break. Is this really so hard to understand? Imagine a homeland where streets are shared by people who observe different holidays, speak different languages, and vote for different leaders, yet live under laws which were written and are enforced to protect them equally. Imagine institutions that celebrate the richness of our faiths and identities instead of using them as bludgeons. These are not fantasies. They should be plans. Pluralistic societies exist everywhere, and they are built and inhabited by creatures no more or less human than us. Pluralism requires political courage, yes, and primarily the political courage to treat one another as equal and equally worthy. But there are times when courage is not too much to ask. Why do I still believe in peace? Today, after all this hell, it is because I have seen your humanity, just as you have seen mine. It is because I believe in planting seeds for a future in which our children, Jewish, Palestinian, and others, can live without trading their dignity for someone else's safety. I hold this truth as clearly as I see the sun rising over Jerusalem. There can be no lasting peace without justice, and no justice without recognizing each other as fully human. If anything in these words stings, let it be the sting of honesty, not hostility. My hand is extended not for victory, but for repair. Let us begin there.
Steve, thank you. I'd like to just have a few seconds of just silence to take a breath and take in what you said. Just good morning. It is my great honor to introduce Erin Lockwood, who lives in Irvine and is a political scientist with UC, with the university. She works with an interfaith group, CLUE, and the Orange County Rapid Response, and she has witnessed what is happening and what is changing in our courthouses. So I am honored to hear her story. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you to Svantia for inviting me to come speak to this group. Um, yeah, as Greg said, I'm a UCI political scientist. I live here in Irvine. Um, I'm also an Episcopalian. I'm on my church's vestry or board, which seems to be taking up undue amounts of my life right now. And I became connected with CLUE, which is the organization that was coordinating the courthouse response through my congregation's work with IRIS, which is the LA Diocese Immigration and Refugee Service Organization. Um, and it's an organization that's under a tremendous amount of pressure right now since refugee admissions have been halted under the Trump administration. But prior to that, was one of the main partners for refugee resettlement in the region. Um, I I come to this work surrounding immigration advocacy and organizing through a series of formative experiences, most of which have much more to do with my personal life than my professional life. My academic work as a political scientist lets me speak the language of policy and institutions that's been really valuable for understanding how the immigration landscape is changing. But the work I'm going to speak about today is work that I've done in my personal, not my professional capacity, and I do want to emphasize that. So personally, I grew up in Laramie, Wyoming, in the 1990s and 2000s. If you've heard of Laramie, Wyoming, I hope it's because it's the home of the University of Wyoming. Go Cowboys! But if that's not how you've heard of it, you've likely heard of it because it's where a young gay man, Matthew Shepard, was brutally murdered and left to die tied to a fence outside of town. That happened when I was 8 years old, which is a young age to suddenly have to confront a whole range of things that, as a child, I'd really never had to think about: homophobia, violence, death, and all of the aftermath of that, which really, Laramie's a small town, and it was it really rocked our community in a lot of ways, but it also meant I got to see how my church at the time and others came together to speak out against homophobia, to organize. There was one point where the Westboro Baptist Church came to protest. I think it was Matt Shepard's funeral or something in town. They're the group who has these awful signs that say like God hates fags and this kind of thing. Um, so they came and they just wanted to be ugly. And this group of volunteers, some local religious leaders and also university leaders, crafted these giant wings out of PVC pipes and sheets, so they looked like angel costumes, and they were very tall, and they formed a ring around the Westboro Baptist Church protesters to block the sight of their ugly signs from the folks who had gathered to remember Matt Shepard. And that's really stuck with me as this sort of creative, tangible act of being the hands and the wings of God at work in the world. It didn't stop the counter protest. It didn't change the dynamics of Laramie's politics and grappling with the aftermath of that. Um, but it was formative about what people can do when they come together and think creatively to stand for love and justice. So that's, I come to this work through that, and more specifically to immigration work through some volunteer work I did in college with refugee families. Um, and that's all been sort of in the background of my life. And then June 2025 happened. Um, so in June 2025, there was this, as I'm sure you remember, because this was recent history, what brought a big increase in federal immigration enforcement. So in the remainder of my time, I want to speak to what changed in June, and in particular, what changed in terms of immigration enforcement at courthouses, immigration courthouses. I want to tell you a little bit about what that looked like to give you a sense of kind of what it felt like to be there and watch this. I want to tell you a little bit about what CLUE and the Orange County Rapid Response Network did in response, and then I can conclude with some comments about sort of what I've learned and what you can do if this is a ministry and a direction of service that you feel called to participate in as well. So. As soon as President Trump began his second term in office, he dramatically increased and changed the landscape of immigration policy enforcement in the United States. And so the courthouse arrests, this phenomenon where people showing up for their immigration hearings, which they're legally required to do under immigration law, would be arrested at the courthouse and immediately detained and often deported. That was the result of a change in how the Trump administration interpreted existing immigration policy. So a year ago, in January, well, a year and a month ago, in January of 2025, the Department of Homeland Security expanded the use of this category in immigration law called expedited removal. Expedited removal allows the government to deport somebody that they believe to be undocumented without their ever seeing a judge, unless they can request and pass what's called a credible fear interview, which allows them to seek asylum in the country. And previously, this was a category of immigration enforcement that had only applied to people who were recent arrivals in the country. And by that, it meant they'd been in the country less than 14 days, and it only applied within 100 miles of the border. And so this was what gave Customs and Border Patrol the authority to arrest people at the U.S.-Mexico border and immediately return them to Mexico. So already this was a violent policy of exclusion, but it was dramatically ramped up. It has been dramatically ramped up under the Trump administration. This policy of expedited removal is part of the broader landscape of why so many people are being arrested in the kinds of raids that you're seeing in places like Minneapolis. But I'm not going to speak to that so much, in part because I'm not an immigration law expert, which is something that's become very clear to me in the course of this work. But also because I just don't have the sort of firsthand experience of that. So the piece of this I do know about is how this category of expedited removal got applied to the courthouse. And the way this worked is that when an immigration judge rules that an immigrant is not eligible for relief from removal proceedings, which is all this legal language that means if you've got an ongoing case in immigration court, and you reach the end of the road of your court case, and the judge determines that, nope, you aren't going to be able to apply for asylum, we can't give you any more time, your case is dismissed. Typically, what would have happened before the second Trump administration is that the judge would say, you have 30 days to leave the country. And that would have been the end of that. You might have been required to check in with USCIS at some point in those 30 days. The thing that changed in June of 2025 was that suddenly people whose cases were dismissed by immigration judges were being immediately arrested as soon as they walked out of the courtroom. There would be ICE agents in the hall. They would present themselves to the individual, escort them out the building and take them to detention facilities. Uh, and so the way this played out, this happened in immigration courthouses across the country. You may have seen there was quite a lot of coverage of how this was playing out in New York City courthouses. And it was certainly happening in Southern California as well, in the federal immigration courthouse in San Diego, the one in LA, and the one in Santa Ana here in Orange County. Others too across the country, but again, I'm speaking to the ones I'm familiar with. So from June to late August of last year, ICE agents were present at the Santa Ana Immigration Court nearly daily to immediately arrest and detain people who fell under this expedited removal category, folks who had their cases dismissed, who had been in the country for less than 2 years. There were reports of others being arrested and detained as well. I want to emphasize how hard it is to collect any sort of hard data on the numbers of this kind of thing. ICE has some data that they make public, but it doesn't tell you about sort of the nature of the arrests or the location of the arrests. And the witnesses to this were just volunteers. There's no sort of official statistics and data gathered on this kind of thing. So it's difficult for me to say beyond what I observed and what I know, talking to my fellow volunteers about the scale and scope of this. But I can say that I was there from June to August, at least 2 or 3 times every week. And I think ICE was present probably almost all of those days. ICE arrested somebody probably at least half of those days. So this was a very this became a common feature of immigration court during that time. And it had effects beyond the folks who were arrested and detained. Certainly, I mean, there were profound impacts for their families and their loved ones who had especially at the beginning, had just no expectation at all that this was a thing that could happen. So, I saw people who had their car keys and were arrested by ICE and were like, well, what am I supposed to do with my car? It's in the parking lot. Just had no sense of that this was even a possibility because it really hadn't been prior to these policy changes under the Trump administration. But beyond that, it also made other community members afraid to show up for their hearings, other immigrants afraid to show up for their hearings. And this really matters because if you don't show up for your immigration hearing, an immigration judge can and will rule you removable in absentia. And so we saw this happen too. People wouldn't show up because they were afraid they'd be arrested by ICE at the courthouse, and the judge ruled that they issued a deportation order in their absence, which meant as soon as ICE could find them, they would be deported. Some folks decided that was worth the risk, that they'd rather have that deportation order out against them rather than be taken at the courthouse. But these are terrible, brutal calculations for folks to be having to make. Most of them were making them without any sort of legal advice, and in a system that is in every way stacked against them. And I'll speak to that a little bit more in a moment. So that's the policy change. So what did this look like in practice? I don't know. Have any of you all been to this immigration court in Santa Ana? Maybe not so much. Yeah, I know people are kind of all over Southern California. So I don't know what I pictured when I started this work, but I don't think it was what I found. So the Santa Ana Immigration Court is in this totally bland office park of white buildings and parking lot, like quintessential office park sprawl of Southern California. It would be very hard to even know it's there. It shares office space with the Orange County, it's like the Office of Environmental something or other. And then a bunch of like businesses. It does have insignia on the door that says it's a federal immigration court, but you certainly wouldn't know from the parking lot or if you were just walking around or stopping at the Lost Bean coffee shop that's around the corner that you were right next door to a federal immigration court. It's on the second floor of the building. Once you got in, you would know because you have to go through security to enter it. And we came to know over the course of the summer the security guards very well because they were there every day and they were seeing the same thing. Oh, somebody's been to the immigration court in downtown LA. Yeah, so this was happening there too, and Clue was also active in LA. So. Yeah, you go through, we got to know the security guards very well. They were witnesses to this as well. And you go through security and then you're just in this kind of maze of hallways. Down the hallways are the courtrooms behind closed doors, no window. Each immigration judge presides over their own courtroom. The courtrooms look each very uniform. They look, if you've been on a jury trial, look kind of like that. There's benches in the back. I was always struck by how much the benches felt like pews in a church, which was just, I don't know what to make of that. One day I'll write a poem about that, but they feel like pews. Then you've got kind of a gate for the front area of the court. The judge sits at the top. It's often very hard to see or hear the judge. They've got a big computer terminal in front of them that they're clicking through to keep track of their docket. Often they spoke very softly. Next to the immigration judge is their clerk. And then there was typically a simultaneous interpreter, a Spanish language interpreter, because most of the cases, or many of the cases anyway, were concerning native Spanish speakers. So that's the judge up at the front on the altar. And then in front of that, you would have one table with the attorney for the government, the Department of Homeland Security attorney, the DHS attorney. And then another table for the community. The legal term is the respondent. So the immigrant whose court case is being determined. If they had a lawyer, their lawyer would also sit there, but most of these folks did not have lawyers. There was a big TV screen in the courtroom because some of these hearings, especially if they were just to reschedule dates, happened via the court's kind of like Zoom version of Zoom. It was called WebEx. So sometimes we saw attorneys that way as well. So that's kind of what it looks like. It looks bland, it looks ordinary, there's no decorations anywhere, there's an American flag in the courthouse. At some point in July, somebody came in and put up a poster of Trump and Vance, or portraits, because I guess there was some policy that all federal facilities have to have portraits of Trump and Vance. They put them over by the bathrooms, which we were like, I wonder who got to decide where the portraits go, and if there was a message there. So they're like way out of the way over by the water fountain bathrooms. But that's it. I want to really emphasize, and then out in the hallways are just chairs, like outside each courtroom for people to wait in. So I really want to emphasize how ordinary all of this looks. The ICE agents also look very ordinary. They would typically appear in plain clothes, jeans, flannel shirts. That was kind of their uniform, sunglasses, baseball hat. It was the same, for the most part, the same group of agents all summer. So I came to recognize all of them. But if you didn't recognize them, if you were a person appearing for court or their family or their friends, you would not know that these were federal agents. They did not have any sort of, they had badges under their shirts that they would pull out when they arrested somebody. But if they're just sitting there, you would have no way to know. And in fact, I saw several times people speaking to them people at immigration court had so many questions about everything. And most of these folks don't have lawyers. And so they would turn to the people next to them and ask them questions. And they didn't realize these were ICE agents. There was one case where I was in the courtroom and the folks were, a family was kind of sitting next to me in this bench. And there was an ICE agent, someone I knew to be an ICE agent. I guess she was sitting next to me and they were in front of me. And she was Spanish speaking. And so they kept turning around to ask her questions about what was happening. Um, and I think, thought she was like on their side. And I ended up passing them a note in Spanish, and I said, just so you know, like that woman is an ICE agent. I didn't want them saying anything that might jeopardize their case. Uh, and they were shocked, right? They had no idea. They're like, what, really? Yeah. And then, they later saw her arrest someone, so they knew. But um, the courtroom is ordinary. The ICE agents were ordinary. ICE agents typically had prior information about which cases were likely to be dismissed by an immigration judge. So as soon as a case was dismissed, if the person was eligible for expedited removal, they would be arrested by ICE in the hallway. ICE agents could not conduct arrests in courtrooms, like in the courtroom itself, but they can in the courthouse, can and did. If you were following some of the reporting this summer coming out of New York, you would have seen these like often like really kind of violent confrontations. And I was reading this reporting too, and people would kind of fight back and yell, and there would be observers who would be yelling. I never saw that in the Orange County courthouse. This was a very quiet kind of violence. Um, People didn't fight back. They were overwhelmed. They were stunned. They didn't understand or know what was happening. Um, I didn't see any confrontations, and there's a particular kind of horror in the sort of bland, ordinary quietness with which these immigration actions were carried out. They they often didn't know that this, especially early on, they didn't even know this could happen. And then when they did, there was often this sort of sense of resignation. So ICE would arrest them in the hallway, take them out the back door of the courthouse to these unmarked white vans, load them into the vans, and then take them to detention facilities. Often, the people that ended up at Adelanto detention facility, but not always. And we tried our best to kind of track where people ended up. So that's what it looked like. That's a little bit of what it felt like. Um, what did CLUE and Orange County Rapid Response Network do in response? As soon as this started happening, CLUE, which is Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, it's an interfaith group sort of centered around Southern California. They are an organization that formed and has historically done much of their advocacy around labor rights. But they also have a staffer who works on immigration issues. And when this started happening, they sort of immediately jumped into gear. And together with the Orange County Rapid Response Network, which is a network of volunteers who verify and respond to federal immigration enforcements in Orange County, they assembled a team of volunteers to act as observers and witnesses in immigration court. And I was part of that team. Immigration court is open to the public, subject to some limits. So if you want to, you can go in just as a private citizen and sit in an immigration courtroom. It's at the discretion of the judge, and we learned some judges were more receptive to this than others, but mostly the judges were fine with having quiet, peaceful community observers in the courtroom. Sometimes they'd ask us to introduce ourselves, so DHS has my name, and I'm sure I'm on some sort of list now, but you are welcome to go and attend. Nothing we were doing, I want to emphasize, was illegal at all. It was fully within the law. And after a sort of a couple-hour training where we were given an orientation by a CLUE staffer about sort of the ins and outs of immigration court, we would sign up for shifts with a partner to take a morning or afternoon shift at the courthouse. So there's kind of two blocks of hearings. There's a morning block that starts at 8 a.m. and an afternoon block that starts at 1 p.m. And so you would sign up for that block of hearings. And we would hand out information out front of immigration court to the folks coming in. So we put together a flyer with information about their legal rights in the courthouse, and in English. We did it in a couple languages, English and Spanish. And we would warn them on days that we knew that ICE was there because we started to recognize them. We would warn them if ICE was present at the courthouse that day. We would ask them if they'd been in the country less than 2 years, which was what put them at heightened risk, and tell that to them, and offer to accompany them to their hearing if they wanted it, emphasizing that we were not lawyers. We could not provide legal advice, and we were there as members of religious communities. To do this, some people spoke Spanish. Some of the volunteers spoke Spanish, some didn't, some spoke other languages. We relied a lot on Google Translate. This really was, I mean, it's quite a thing to kind of like stop somebody as they're coming into immigration court and be like, hey, I have some information for you. ICE is here, right? Like, this is not you have to, this is an alarming thing to say to people. We got to know some of the immigration attorneys too. They would ask us like, oh, is ICE here today? Um, and we wanted to do it quickly because people don't want to be late for their hearing. So I think we all kind of developed our own strategies for how to approach these conversations urgently but compassionately. I got very good at my little Spanish script about warning people about what might happen. And then once in the courtroom or once in the courthouse, we would watch where the ICE agents went, trying to make sure there were volunteers near them so that if they did arrest somebody, we could try to get information from the person being arrested, contact information for a family or a friend that we could call afterwards to explain what had happened and provide them with some resources. We did this in the courtroom as well. So if I was in a courtroom and a case was dismissed, especially if it was someone I'd talked to coming into the courthouse and I knew they were here for less than 2 years, or if I saw ICE agents in the courtroom, I would go and sit quietly next to, when their case was dismissed, the judge would say, okay, go sit back in your bench while my clerk prints out your deportation orders. And so I would go sit next to them and slip them a piece of paper that said, you're at risk of being arrested when you leave this courtroom. Can I get the contact information of a friend or family member that I can, get in touch with on your behalf? ICE will take your phone. Um, and typically people would be willing to give me that information. Sometimes they weren't, which I very much respected. I mean, it's quite a thing to trust this like random lady with bad Spanish language skills who's like, "Can I have your loved one's family member? You're going to be arrested." But just think about just the bizarreness of of their being in their position. But people did, and that's a tremendously sacred responsibility to be handed that on a slip of paper. And I would feel this like overwhelming responsibility then to follow up with the friends and family members. And so someone on our team or me would follow up with their relatives via phone or text, usually text. I would use text because my Spanish is just, for stuff like this, it's too important. So if I was using text, I could rely on Google Translate to help because there's like that time delay. We would reach out to the family members, tell them what we witnessed, connect them with the Orange County Rapid Response Network's participatory defense efforts, which are these like community-led efforts to compile information and support impacted family members. We would help them try to locate their loved ones in the detention system. And beyond that, there was not, if they wanted, we would offer to pray for them. And it was tremendously humbling because in reality, there was nothing else we could do. They would text me back and say, there's one woman who was due with a baby later that month. And she was like, well, I need my husband to be here. And of course she did. She said, well, I need to get him out. And I need you to help me get him out. And there's no way to get him out. He was in Adelanto. It's all but impossible to get somebody out on a bond hearing, or to get someone a bond hearing and to get them out on a bond right now. And so this was really heartbreaking work where you'd feel like you're really doing something when you'd get that contact information and then realize, this doesn't change. This doesn't change their fate. So most of what we were doing there was being witnesses. We couldn't change these people's fate at the hands of a state that fundamentally does not value them as people. All we could do is be there as a sign that we recognized their humanity. Um, we tried to help on the margins where we could by providing information. And as a professor, like that's always my go-to is like, we'll solve this problem with more information. And these were problems that couldn't be solved with more information. Sometimes that information was helpful, but it wasn't going to change the structures that they were up against. So often, all I could do was sit with someone or stand with somebody and say, no es justo, no es justo. It's not fair, it's not fair. I know you're afraid. Yo sé que tienes miedo. Um, and that's a tremendously painful position to be in. So this was hard work, spiritually, emotionally, and all I could keep in mind was like as rough as it was for me and my fellow volunteers, it was so much worse for the people going through this. So that's what we did. And I'm saying this all in the past tense because I stopped showing up at the courthouse in early September. And at first, this kind of felt like a victory. I'm like, good, maybe we scared them away. I don't think it was. The other thing that happened in early September was that the Supreme Court ruled that ICE could use race, ethnicity, language, and employment status as probable cause for arresting people. So these kinds of large-scale raids that you're seeing in Minneapolis, that we've seen in Los Angeles, they were given the green light by the Supreme Court that you can stop by a Home Depot, and if you see people speaking Spanish and they're day laborers, that's enough reason to arrest them. And so we kind of concluded that it was probably the case that ICE could more easily meet their quotas via raids and racial profiling than picking off people at the courthouse. There were also, over the course of the summer, very sharply increasing numbers of no-shows of people who didn't show up for their court dates. So that probably also made it harder for ICE to get their quotas. So a victory in one sense, in that people going through the immigration legal proceedings didn't have to deal with this additional layer of fear at the courthouse. But it's only because the layer of fear it's now not just at the courthouse, it's everywhere. A core group of faithful court observers has continued this ministry even after ICE has left. They're still there every week. I'm not among them. I, after the summer, had to go back to full-time teaching and professional life. But that core group is there, and I'm still in touch with them every week. They continue to minister to those caught up in removal proceedings, providing resources where they can, and bearing witnesses to ongoing shifts in the immigration process. The big one that's happened over the course of the fall is that there's been some other policy change up in the Department of, probably in the Department of Justice, or Homeland Security, that has allowed DHS to move to what's called pre-termit cases. That's the language that's being used. And what this means is that you can be, without ever having an asylum hearing, you can be removed from the US and sent to a third country, typically Honduras or Ecuador. In ordinary times, if you are requesting asylum in the United States and you pass a credible fear interview, you have a right to what's called a merits hearing. You have a right to present an immigration judge with evidence about your fear of particular kinds of persecution in your home country. The judge will look at that evidence and hear your case and then decide to grant you asylum or deny that request. That's not the case anymore. Now, DHS can move to dismiss your case before you ever have a merits hearing if they determine you're unlikely to prevail on the merits. So again, that's DHS making that determination, not an immigration judge. That's just, and they always make that determination, shockingly. And they can order your removal to a third country. So the United States has signed these agreements with Honduras and Ecuador, among other countries. Those are the ones that most often people here are getting sent to. So they're not returning people to their home country, they're sending them to a third country. From what the immigration court observers have seen, these motions are always granted by immigration judges. They have not seen, it's not to say it hasn't happened, but they have not seen a case where a respondent has successfully opposed a motion to deport them to a third country. Even when people say, like, Honduras is not a safe country for me either, that it doesn't seem to matter. There have also been like Kafka-esque series of changes in fees and deadlines and all of the like paperwork requirements for people's immigration cases that even when I was there this summer, I heard immigration judges expressing like frustration with. Often this is poorly communicated to the immigration judges, but can really matter for people's cases. So, what I've learned through this um, is just how banal bureaucratized violence can be. In contrast to the angry confrontations with ICE that we've seen elsewhere and in other settings, these confrontations with ICE were quiet, kind of eerily so, and became part of the landscape of the courthouse. Other respondents waiting in the hall would see it, and that was terrifying for them. But it wasn't terrifying because it was loud and armed. It was routinized, it was legalized. The other thing, yeah, somebody, John, you put in the chat about the banality of evil. Yeah, I mean, it was like a case study in that. The other thing that's really underscored for me was how unjust the immigration court system is, even without ICE at the courthouse. You may know already that the government will not provide you with a lawyer in immigration court. It's not like criminal court. So if you want a lawyer, you have to pay for one yourself. Most of these folks could not afford a lawyer. They did not have lawyers. And even if they could, there are no immigration attorneys available, especially low cost or pro bono immigration attorneys right now. We would have this sheet of legal resources we would hand out to people. We would see them at their next hearing and they'd say, we called all 19 numbers on that list. Nobody will call us back. Everyone's far over capacity. We saw people getting scammed. So they would say, you know, the judge would be like, well, where's your attorney? I thought you had one. And they'd say, no, they took $2,000 from me and I never heard back from them. We saw that multiple times. And those folks have no recourse, right? They're already vulnerable to the system. There's no way they can like sue this scam artist through the Better Business Bureau or something. Even if they're not scammed, everything is happening in two layers of a different language. The first layer is that it's happening in English. That's the language of the court. And so maybe you're listening to a simultaneous translation on a headset in a way that cannot be the same as hearing it in the original language. If a person spoke a language other than English or Spanish, there was not a in-person courtroom interpreter available. Instead, they'd call into a service of legal interpretation and find whatever speaker they needed, a Ukrainian speaker or a Sinhalese speaker, and put that person on speakerphone in the courtroom. And those connections were bad. They were hard to understand. Once there was one in Italian, and I know like enough Italian that I'm sure they were doing the translation correctly, but you just couldn't hear. Um, so that's the first layer of language difficulty. And then even if you spoke English, the prevalence of this like opaque legal language and requirements and this like you'd hear all these things about like motion to preterm it here in this subject to statute whatever 6793 under immigration law, and the judges will just rattle these things off because they're saying this every day, but it means nothing to the people in the courtroom. So this system is the odds are stacked against you as soon as you're caught up in it. And then, I learned quite a lot about the power and the profound limits of bearing witness as an act of service and ministry, which I spoke to a little bit before. It's often all we could do, and it was so little. But how can you not do it if it's all you can do? So, what can you do? Depending on what you feel called to do and your capacity, becoming involved with your local rapid response network is the most direct way to be involved in organized ICE Watch related activities. In Orange County, that's the Orange County Rapid Response Network. I can put this link in the chat. This is a link for California for all of the vetted rapid response networks. Here we go. To contact the contact numbers on there are primarily for reporting ICE sightings. So don't call those to get involved, but that gives you a contact to Google and connect with independently of calling that phone number. CLUE has continued to do the immigration courthouse observation, as I said, even after ICE has left the courthouse and has not come back since September. If that's something you feel called to become involved with, the contact person for that is Jennifer Correa. I think in some of the information I sent ahead of time, I think I sent her email, but I can put that in the chat as well. She is their staffer who's done a truly heroic job in organizing all of this. And I should say organizing all of this on zero notice, right? Like when the policy changed and I started showing up at the courthouse, like this response had to formed in a matter of basically a week from scratch. Correa like this. There we go. And I put her email address in the chat if you want to get in touch with her. She organizes trainings for the courthouse observation and then organizes the roster of volunteers. Jennifer Correa. There we go. Oh, thank you, Rick. Yeah. Okay, let me go back to my notes. What else did I have? So beyond those like very specific ways of being involved, so much of this is stuff we really can't impact tremendously on a federal level, but local politics are tremendously important. Multiple cities in Orange County have passed organized legal defense funds, so they will pay for legal assistance for workers or community members who are arrested by ICE within their cities. Brea has one, Costa Mesa and Santa Ana have one. Irvine is got one on the city council agenda, likely 2 weeks from now. So calling your local leaders and telling them, this is something you are worried about. This is something you support. What is your city gonna do? Like people are being arrested now. What is my city gonna do to protect them? You can speak out in terms of school policies. This is an area where local advocacy has made a tremendous amount of difference. I think it was a Westminster school. No, I think it was Placencia Yorba Linda School District. Had an issue. The school board wanted to pass this very ICE-friendly resolution saying they would like welcome the presence of ICE on their campus and not interfere. And the community pushed back and got them to change that policy. cities have some discretion over how their police do or do not cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. And these are all things that, I think your voice is likely to carry much more weight on than than anything directed at the federal level. Um, Serve where you are called to serve, but these are where I've seen actual changes happen, is with local school boards, with local municipalities. And then finally, be a good neighbor. For those of you who are Christians in our scripture, um, we are called to be neighbors to everyone, regardless of ethnicity, of nationality, um, regardless of legal status, right? Our God is not a God who cares about legal status. Um, and I know that similar ethics pervade other faiths as well. Being a good neighbor in this case doesn't mean just sort of a passively like saying putting a sign in your front yard. Um, it means knowing in advance that if you see immigration enforcement in your neighborhood or at your workplace or in the parking lot of Home Depot or Albertsons, you know who to report it to. So that link with rapid response numbers that I posted tells you for where you live who to report it to, and that you know what to report. The acronym that gets used to summarize this is SALUTE. So that you should report to your rapid response network the size of the immigration enforcement, like the number of officers, whether they are armed, whether what they are wearing, what the time is, what the date is, um, and that you are thinking ahead about like, what do I need to witness that I can make a report? Why make that report? Because these are trained volunteers who will verify that some sighting actually is ICE. We want to make sure that there are not false rumors that are unnecessarily spreading fear in communities. And then if it is an immigration enforcement, make sure that we can connect to family and friends of folks impacted to connect them with resources. Being a good neighbor in these times means buying a whistle and knowing to make noise. If you see immigration enforcement, make noise because it warns other people who may be vulnerable. Make noise so that this doesn't keep happening in this silent, quiet, normalized kind of fashion. The burden is really on all of us to say, this isn't normal. This isn't okay. This is an offense to my understanding of what it means to live in community. Yeah, thank you, John, for putting the actual salute stuff in there. I didn't have it right in front of me. And then be a witness. Tell people what you saw, tell people what you've observed, tell people what you've heard in this session today. It's one thing to read about all of this on the news. It's quite another to hear from a trusted friend or coworker or neighbor. Yeah, it is happening here. I've seen it. Here's what I saw at the park. Here's what I saw at the courthouse. I mean, when I started doing this work, people were like, you've seen ICE arrest people? Yeah, like it's not uncommon. It's happening right in front of me. But they don't know, and how would they know? I didn't know before I happened to be there in the spaces where this was happening. Those stories matter, and I do believe that they can change minds. So that's what I have on my end. I'm happy to chat further about any questions you might have.
Rick?
Erin, thank you very much. I I can I can only imagine what kind of like psychological and emotional burden that must be to bear witness every time you're there and not really be able to do anything, right? You can't really change um, what the issue is and what's happening to these people. I wanted to see from your aspect, it does sound like there's been a downturn in the immigration courts, but there still is a need for people to be witness to what is happening with the DHS and ICE. And I think what's been very, very good is seeing things like what's happening in Minnesota,
Mhm.
where either because they are hungry or because they are staking out someplace, um, ICE, plainclothes ICE agents are being chased out of like restaurants and stuff like that. Um, there's been a call to make sure that if somebody is a a employee of either of those organizations during this time, that that is a serious consideration if someone is applying for a job
Mhm.
afterwards. Um, and I think in all of those ways, the push is to make um, this, you know, predatory attempt at fascism unprofitable for people.
Mhm.
And I wanted to see if, obviously having a whistle and having the wherewithal to be somewhere and make yourself useful in a situation like this is great. I wanted to see if you thought there were any other um, actions that are happening around the
Mhm.
country that are standing out to you as being very effective.
Mhm. So I don't know about effective.
Mm.
Whenever I hear that word, I like put on my political science hat and say, well, how are you operationalizing that? How are we going to measure effectiveness? It's too
Where are the
early.
metrics? Yeah.
Um, so some of the actions, I mean, I can speak to actions that people have done that are all oriented around this idea of shaming ICE agents, right? Of saying this isn't normal, this should be shameful. So one thing is that enterprising networks of volunteers have found where they're staying in hotels. And have organized campaigns to make noise outside of the hotel, to be really loud at night. Um, Not so much. I mean, it's partly about like harassing the ICE agents, but what it's really about is sending a signal to the hotel owners that their other customers are there's going to be consequences for their other customers for their decision to let ICE stay on their property. Because it's going to be so loud that people aren't going to want to stay there and they're going to leave bad reviews, and it's creating an economic penalty for hosting ICE. So we've had some of that in Orange County. Right now, there are ICE agents. People know where they're staying in Irvine, in Long Beach, and a couple other places. So that's one thing that's kind of organized in that direction. One of the things I'm keeping an eye on now is that there was just a report from Wired magazine that was confirmed by the Orange County Register about a major expansion of ICE leasing office buildings across the country, but a couple of the ones that were specifically named in the Wired article are here in Orange County. So there's one building right next to actually the Santa Ana Immigration Courthouse where ICE has leased office space. There's one right by John Wayne Airport, 2020 Main Street in Irvine, where ICE has just taken out a big lease of office space, and I think one in LA as well. So I know there are efforts underway to organize around that and figure out what might be the most effective way to put pressure on the leasing agents, the building owners, around that, but also to notify folks around who work and live around those areas that look, ICE is going to be here now. ICE is going to be here every day. Um, so yeah, those are kind of two I'm aware of. I know some states are considering legislation that would be sort of down the road about like you mentioned about how having worked for ICE would impact your qualification for future state jobs. Um, yeah, that's what at least the things I'm familiar with.
Thank you, Erin. Don.
Yeah, you might have already answered my question, but in Santa Cruz, we're a small little community. Our board of supervisors just are starting they call it a shield program where they're going to start discussing how the city and the county can deal with ICE and ICE raids. Do you have any suggestions that, some of the community members like me and the NAACP and other groups are trying to get on that steering committee that so we can have a voice in what's going on in our own community because we kind of don't trust the board of supervisors. Do you have any suggestions on what we could do?
Oh man, that's a really good question. The first thing I would emphasize for any sort of organizing around immigration enforcement is to as much as possible and as much as is safe, center and listen to impacted communities first and foremost. There's often a tremendous amount of very well-intentioned energy among allies to act and act quickly on these issues. And so at least sometimes, despite good intentions, um, there's a risk that things we do make impacted communities more vulnerable. For example, for a while there was this sort of idea being passed around that if you saw someone being arrested by ICE, you needed to get their name. That's probably not good advice. People shouldn't be shouting. That needs to be a decision that they're making about whatever, or like personal information. That's a decision they need to make about what is safe for them to disclose to federal immigration enforcements. That's not something community members should be calling for. Um, and it wasn't, people weren't doing this because they were trying to hurt people, right? They were just doing it because they thought it was helpful and they wanted to help, and it was this moment of crisis. So I mean, that's kind of like a meta piece of advice is make connections with, you know, folks in your community who are most going to be most vulnerable to these immigration enforcements and get a sense of what their needs are, and what they want, and let that sort of guide your advocacy. I'm certainly not the best person to speak to that. I'm a citizen. I'm white. I'm English speaking. I'm highly educated. I'm on ICE. It might be on ICE's radar for other reasons now, but it's not for the racial profiling reasons. So I think deferring to those voices and doing the work to kind of make connections to those communities has to come first. Um, yeah, the things that's, I mean, at the level of like policy, that cities or counties can do, um, clear policies about cooperation and information sharing with federal immigration enforcements, and having that written down and enforced, super important. Yeah, so like I said, some cities here have established legal defense funds. Um, I I think that's a very important thing to do, and it sends an important signal to the community. I worry about how much it actually does. Certainly, it's the case that it's better to have representation in immigration court than not have it, but it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't guarantee you won't be deported. Far from it. But that it's still a meaningful thing that's easily done at the city level. In partnership. So the way this typically work is that they're in partnership with vetted organizations with immigration attorneys that have the capacity to take on this work. So the city would commit some amount of funds to be held for these immigration efforts. If somebody is arrested, they reach out to the immigration law firm, and at that point would pay for the person's legal representation. So those are a couple that come to mind. But yeah, you got to find out what the folks in your community, who are most impacted and most vulnerable would like to see.
Thank you, Erin. This is fascinating. Uh, I understand Michael, Quantadon, and then Steve. So, Michael?
I just wanted to add that the corollary to what Erin was talking about in terms of these courts is that the thing about no longer allowing bond, they basically took a law that applied to people, being arrested, trying to cross the border, and have now applied it to everybody. And so that's behind these also not just the immigration courts, but and the officers and they're building these either renting or building massive warehouses, quote unquote, which are basically concentration camps all around the country for detention without possibility of release, except for expulsion from the country. In really large numbers, and we should be aware that that's in train now. I think calling these things courts almost is a misnomer. The judges aren't really judges, and they're not judicial appointments. They're employees of ICE basically, and I think it's the scale is going to really be grim.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is that the Trump administration has fired tremendous amounts of immigration judges, and the ones who are left are all on notice that the DOJ is keeping a close eye on their numbers of deportations, of case dismissals. Um, so I haven't talked to the judges directly, but that's also in the background. Like these are political actors.
Thank you. Quanta Dawn.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was also a trained court observer, and was a member of an organization called A tu lado, which means on your side or at your side. And I had to give up being a court observer because I was deeply depressed when I saw some things. I was very depressed. And I even went to counseling, and then she said, for your own, health, maybe you should just, suspend it for a while. Because the last thing that I saw was a man who was married to an American lady, and they had children. He had a business, but and he was from Honduras or El Salvador. I don't remember correctly. Because I was making notes, and Judge even asked me what I was doing, so it was kind of intimidating.
Hmm.
And I did that for a while, not just, one time.
Hmm.
But there wasn't really any mechanism to assist those of us who were involved in this training and also working as a court observer to be supportive, emotional support as well. Just knowing what to do is not enough
Hmm.
because we're human beings and we get impacted. So in your organization, do you have a mechanism where you help the people that are very much emotionally affected by what they see in the courts? I
Yeah,
was just wondering.
Clue has I'm trying to remember because this was back over the summer, but y yes, there was a provision of I don't know if it was actually like mental health services, but I think it was clergy led, a sort of group processing session that was made available to members of this volunteer community a couple times throughout the summer. I can't really speak more to what that looked like because I didn't participate in that. But it was very much part of the conversation, and one of the things that Jennifer and the other Clue folks have insisted on the whole time is that this doesn't have to be for everyone. People are called to serve in lots and lots of different ways. And if this is work you can't do, that's fine. Other people are here to do it. You will find the work that you are called to do and can do. So I think, hearing both of those things, and talking to other people, I talked to volunteers who are like, I did this once and I can't do this again. This is brutal. And then, folks that for whatever reason, I was sort of in the other camp of, for whatever reason, I felt like, yeah, I can do this. Um, I processed in lots of different ways. I wrote a lot of poetry. And I'm not really a poet. I guess I am now. Um, uh, um, and sharing. I mean, my poor husband, like, I think bore the brunt of this because I would just come home and dump on him about every single thing I'd seen. And it is hard. I mean, I started carrying, I have small children, and so I started just carrying like fruit snacks and stickers in my bag when I'd go to immigration court because there's kids there. Their parents are so stressed and they've got this like squirrely 3 or 4 year old who has no idea what's going on, but like can pick up on the stress. And like 3 and 4 year olds pick up on stress by just often becoming like tiny tornadoes, or silly. And of course, it's in an immigration courtroom and you've got this kid just like being a total goofball because they can pick up on the stress and like don't know how to process it. So just being able to say like, okay, here's some fruit snacks and like some stickers to sit quietly. But that's horrible, right? Like these kids, they could have been my kids, but for accidents of birth, right? They just happened to be born somewhere else. They didn't choose any of this. No one chooses where they're born. Um, yeah, it's. I think if there's organizations who are organizing this part of this kind of work, there is a tremendous imperative to make sure they're caring for the people who are doing it.
Oh, thank you, Erin. That's so important. Steve, and then Carol Francis.
Erin, I'm so grateful that you're here today, but also that you did this work day in and day out, or week in and week out. It's so important for each of us to find a place to be part of the resistance, at whatever level we're able to do it. I had a two-part question that are quite disparate. First of all, Congress passed these laws, and we spent 4 years under the Biden administration without these regulations being put into law. Some of the regulations are just regulations, which can be changed once a different administration comes into office. I gather that what you observed was not illegal by the federal agencies. Did you have any advice that what they were doing was illegal? Has a court ruled that any of it is illegal? That's the first question. And secondly, we're an interfaith group, and I wondered how both your faith informed what you did and are doing, and how it has amplified or deepened or challenged your faith.
Yeah, those are heading in very, very different parts of my brain for those two questions. Um, on the legality question, I am not a lawyer. I just keep insisting on that because the intricacies of what is law, what is policy via executive order, um, how the executive branch is choosing to implement law that's been passed by Congress. A lot of that I don't have a tremendous amount of clarity on. On the issue of expedited removal, which is the legal justification that the Trump administration is using to deport anybody who's been in the country for less than 2 years, who's undocumented. That is being challenged in courts. There's multiple lawsuits about that. I don't know the status of all of those. And I don't want to speak, I don't want to give wrong or bad information here. I think there's kind of like three layers to this legality question. There's the question of what the law passed by Congress is. There's a question of how the executive branch chooses to interpret that under the discretion that's afforded constitutionally to the executive branch, which is pretty considerable. There's the question of new policies passed by the administration through executive order. those are the ones that can change from administration to administration. So, for example, under the Biden administration, there was an executive order that held that churches, schools, hospitals, courthouses were all not totally exempt from immigration enforcement, but you had to meet a very high standard if you were going to conduct immigration enforcement in those locations. But that policy was immediately changed in the first days of the second Trump administration, that those places are all now fair game, basically. And then there's the question of court rulings and whether the executive branch chooses to follow them. And I don't have as clear a picture as I would like on where all of this falls along those three levels. Much of what's happening is legal in the sense that our Constitution affords considerable latitude to the executive branch, and this particular Congress has chosen not to, exercise its institutional checks on that power. Some of it is being challenged in court as unconstitutional. That process can be long. And the other thing that we're seeing is that this was subsequent to a different Supreme Court ruling. The legal tools that courts have to stop policies through injunctions. Historically, those have applied broadly nationwide when an appeals court issues an injunction and says, wait, before we hear the merits of this case, this policy needs to stop. Now those don't apply broadly. Now those are applying much more locally. So things that can be done in one part of the country are sometimes different than things that can be done in another part of the country. And that's kind of as much clarity as I have on a lot of this.
Thank you, Erin. That was a lot of clarity for me.
And then, on the second question.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the
Erin,
imperative, yeah.
I have forgotten the second question.
The second question was about how my faith has informed and been impacted by this work.
Thank you.
For me, the imperative to see the face of God in everyone is this massive personal challenge that cuts against the grain of so much of how our society is organized culturally, politically, and economically. It's tremendously radical, tremendously countercultural. It flies in the odds of our intuition and common sense when really sort of pushed to the limit. And to me, it makes it tremendously difficult to be a willing participant in systems that do not uphold that divinity of everyone, and that every person is loved by God and created in God's image. In the Episcopal Church, we have it's called corporate confession. So there's a part of our liturgy every Sunday during most of the year is a prayer of confession that we pray together as a group. And there's different forms of this, but one of the forms that I come back to again and again is one where we say that we repent of the evil that we have done, the evil we have left undone, and the evil's done on our behalf. And that third one is one that I think I come back to again and again in thinking about this kind of work. The evil's done on our behalf. And I'm forced every week to reckon with that. We all are, right? In my religious tradition. And so when I see the injustices of the immigration system as it has always existed, and the heightened injustices of the immigration system as it exists under the second Trump administration, for me, that's the evil being done on my behalf. I'm a US citizen. I was born here. This is being done on my behalf. Not I'm not consenting to it. But I have to show that because the default is that it is being done on my behalf. And so for me, that places a profound responsibility on me to say with my words and my actions, this is not being done on my behalf. I For me to repent of that evil means I need to act, I am called to actively oppose it. And I find that a tremendous source of strength and a call that I am called to. I can't say no to, right? That's the voice of God. But also the work has challenged my faith. It's made me think quite a lot about what it is to bear witness as a sacred act. Um, yeah, when it's all you can do, and it's not enough, sitting with that is is very hard. I'm part of we've got a candidate for ordination in my congregation right now who has to do this internship year with us while she discerns her vocational call. And I'm on the committee that's like meeting with her monthly to help her through this process. And we have these from the diocese, we have these questions, we're discussion questions every month. And our questions, we met yesterday, and our questions yesterday were about call stories in scripture. How does she experience her call? And one of the things our group talked about was that when people in Christian and also Jewish scripture are called, it's often the people who are foolish, who are weak, who don't seem to be naturally good leaders. Moses is like, I can't speak eloquently. Don't make me do this. Um, and we're told that like the success of their living out their vocation is not necessarily how we would commonly think about success. It's not necessarily measured by the metrics that we are inclined to think about people being like successful leaders or good leaders. God is after something different, doing something different. And so sometimes I find that helpful to think about like, okay, I'm bearing this witness. It's not doing anything, right? Like it's not changing anything. And to be reminded like that's my definition of success. I would feel more satisfied if I could get this person out of detention and back with their family. Um, but I'm called to do this work even when that doesn't happen. So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
Oh, thank you, Erin, very much. That was moving. Carol Francis.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. I want to start by saying a couple of times, like just now and earlier, you talked about not seeing results
Mm.
from your work. And I just hope you know that when you lean over and give somebody a slip of paper saying, whatever, that they still get deported, but they'll never forget you. They'll never forget there was somebody there on their side. And I think yeah, we want them to not get deported, but that at least know that you have an impact. What I wanted to know is when I hear about these stories, the ICE and deporting people or neighbors, I always think of during the anti-war movement in Vietnam, soldiers themselves were organizing, and the GI movement got organized by soldiers refusing to do what they were told.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, is that possible here that some of these people in ICE or any of the other forces that are called out
Mhm.
will say, no, I've got neighbors that are like that. My neighbor up the street, my coworker, Carlos or Maria, they could be taken away like that.
Mhm.
Is there any way to reach out to them or to find out if they're speaking up among themselves?
It's something I've wondered about.
Erin,
Yeah.
as facilitator, I wanted to honor your request to leave at 9:15.
All right. That's okay. I can be a few minutes late for my next thing.
I just wanted to make it a
Thank
conscious
you.
decision. Thank you.
Let me answer this question because I think it's an important one. It's something I wondered about a lot, especially seeing this core group, the same group of ICE agents every week. Like what was going through their heads? And I, for me, we all had to set our own boundaries in this work. And one boundary I had to set for myself was that I was just not going to engage with them at all. I couldn't do it. I just, that part of the work was not for me. But other volunteers did. They'd go over and chat with them. And some of these agents were they were defensive, right? They were very defensive about what they were doing. And they were bothered by our presence. And they felt the need, some of them felt the need to justify what they were doing. And, there's one woman in our group who in the group chat was like, bro, I'm not here to hear your confession. Like, that's not what I'm here for. So they know, who knows what's going through any individual's head. But one of the things that's powerful about this kind of bearing witness work is they know they're being watched, and they know they're being watched by an audience who firmly believes that what they are doing is wrong. And I think that has to exert its own kind of psychological toll on them. The other thing that I reflected about a lot is that the majority of the team of ICE agents that was there this summer that I was witnessing were not white. Many of them were Asian and Latino. Quite a few of them were Spanish speaking. Occasionally they would translate stuff for us to respondents. When we were trying to get contact information for a loved one, if we had a volunteer whose Spanish wasn't good enough, the ICE agents would translate for us, which is bizarre. And so of course you're sort of forced to think like why are they doing this work? And I think we got to take into account broader structures here too. When there are limited job opportunities to someone in a community, and here you've got the federal government saying, here's this great job, and we're going to give you a bonus and all these federal benefits. People are desperate and they're going to take that work, maybe even against their own judgment. So that doesn't mean we need to like condone what they're doing, but we need to understand why they're doing it. And I think there's a variety of motivations there. Like some people are in it because they are genuinely, they bear genuine animus to immigrants and want to do violence. And ICE has been, or DHS, Department of Homeland Security, has been actively recruiting those people through various white nationalist, not even dog whistles anymore, just white nationalism.
Erin.
Hey, here's a place for you to work. But that's not everyone, right? Like some of them are just desperate for work.
Erin.
Yeah.
These programs are edited and then made available for your use. It's a really rich source. So I'm committed to have us end gracefully and not
All right.
because it's not, I just want to concede to you. We can take another question or we can conclude your choice.
Let's do one more question.
Okay. I think Louis wanted.
Louis was kind enough to drop his hand. Louis, shake your head because
it's fine. I just wanted to comment that God asks us to be faithful, and the outcome we leave to God.
I just want to intervene as chair. The group knows when I do this. Erin, thank you. You are now a card-carrying member of ICUJP. Your lifetime membership is fully paid, and we invite you back on these Friday forums. Come, join us, teach us, learn from us, and please be safe and do good as you are doing.
Thank you. And thank you for your willingness to listen to some hard stuff.
Thank you.
God be with you.
Thank you, Greg, for leading us through this so capably, and to each one of you. Jonathan, the newcomer on the screen, please rejoin us. Go to ICUJP, sign up. You will get a regular weekly announcement of these meetings, and we'd love you to return. And be well, be kind, and do something loving this weekend.